Going to ask my colleague over at WJFI to start recording and remind folks that you are welcome to have your cameras on tonight if that feels comfortable for you, in hopes that it might help create a sense like we're all together in the Grand Maple Ballroom at the Davis Center of UVM if we were able to be. Welcome to what has been for the past 16 years, the Dismantling Rape Culture Conference. And henceforth, we hope will be known as the Building Radically Connected Community Conference hosted by the UVM Women and Gender Equity Center. My name is Sarah Mell. I use they, them, or she, her pronouns, and I am the coordinator of education and outreach at the Wage Center. And I appreciate y'all joining me on this beautiful spring evening. We are excited to create space together tonight, both to honor the experiences of survivors of harm in our shared communities, and to manifest pathways to healing, liberation, and justice. To examine not just what systems have and continue to fail us, but to begin building that which can better serve us all. In order to do that work, it is imperative that we do some acknowledgements. The first of which is to acknowledge that I am coming to you all, and many of you may be joining me, from the stolen land of the Abenaki people here in Vermont. They continue to seek recognition and are very much a part of the social justice fabric of the state of Vermont. We encourage attendees to visit the website of the Nulhegan Band of Cusuk Abenaki to donate to their 7th Harvest Relief Project, which creates and sustains access to ancestral foods in the Northeast Kingdom. And that second link is a save the date for their virtual Heritage Weekend, which will be happening June 16th to the 20th. I dare I say, if we have enough space to open up a little bit by then, we might all be able to be at the Maritime Museum with the Abenaki folks celebrating there, which is where they usually hold it. I also wish to acknowledge that we continue to exist in very fraught times. And the impacts of ongoing gun violence in particular that ravage our shared communities are being felt quite near and dear, particularly at its nexus with white supremacy and anti-Asian hate. We continue to uplift our Asian American Pacific Islander and Desi American families and encourage you all to read the recently released statement from the Vermont APITA for Black Lives group, which is linked here in the chat, and support the accountability requests made by these members of our Vermont family. To access captioning for tonight's event, if that is something that would make things easier for you or someone you are with, we encourage you to click this link in the chat where you can access live captioning, and we want to thank the folks at White Coat Captioning for helping us out with that tonight. To consider the intersections of racism, sexism, misogyny, patriarchy, capitalism, and violence is to exist in this world as a Black person, as a Native or Indigenous person, as a person of color, as a woman, as a queer person, as a trans or gender nonconforming person, as a person with disabilities, as a person experiencing poverty or houselessness. To consider these intersections is to acknowledge the ways we have been complicit in the maintenance of the systems that encourage and support harm, and the necessity of naming our specific, important, necessary truths about experiences of harm we have had. This is the work that the Dismantling Rape Culture Conference has done for years, and we hope this year to use the fuel of our shared grief, frustration, anger, individual exhaustion, to manifest our collective strength and connection, to build what can exist outside of these systems of harm, and specifically tonight, to explore the concept of abolition as key to that shifting and that movement. I want us to have clarity around how our time together will be spent tonight and how we can expect to show up for one another in this space. We hope to center the guidelines first named by Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrisse Cullors when they founded the Black Lives Matter movement, and named that there were 3 principles that needed to be present for any difficult or necessary work to happen. I am posting those in our chat right now. And they are: 1, lead with love. 2, low ego, high impact. In case that's easier. And 3, we will move at the speed of trust. These guidelines are in the chat. I would ask us to hold them salient, especially during any question and answer period tonight, but really throughout all of our interactions. We lead with love. Let us center our shared connections and compassion, recognizing that we are not here to get it right, but rather we are here to learn from and with one another through curiosity and care. We can do that by decentering our own egos, letting go of notions of virtue signaling or knowing more than someone else, and instead recognize the collective wisdom we can share with one another. In doing this, we create a space of high impact, a space that influences us all. And that space will move forward tonight through the gradual trust we build with one another as a community. This doesn't mean we don't want you to ask tough questions. Ashley Messier was particularly clear with me on this point. Big fan of the tough questions, the hard questions, the real honest questions that we need to grapple with if we are going to create change. This is the time for that. This is a time for that honest exploration of the issues that we are facing so we can envision and build together that which mitigates the harm, that which connects us and builds a more just and joyful community. We will hear from our speaker and provide opportunities for ongoing questions throughout. So if you have a burning question in the moment, feel free to use the raise hand function, which can be found in the reactions setting at the lower bar of your Zoom screen. Or if you have your camera on and don't want to try and find where that raise hand function has moved to, because Zoom keeps moving it, feel free to raise an actual hand or type something into the chat. And myself and or Hannah from WJFI will be happy to accommodate that question being responded to in real time. I want to thank Hannah in particular for helping with the technical aspects of our time together tonight and for her genuine kindness and joy as we planned this time together. I also wish to share my appreciation again for White Coat Captioning, who is live transcribing our conversation this evening. And if you wish to access those captions, please scroll up in the feed and find the link. And of course, we wouldn't be holding this event if not for the ongoing support of my colleagues and friends at the Wage Center, our director, Melissa Murray, Programming and Student Leadership Coordinator, Katarina Campbell, and our campus advocate, Judy Rickstad. I appreciate you all so much. And lastly, a generous donation from our UVM Athletics Department allowed for us to hold today's talk. And I wish to express my gratitude for them and for the ongoing relationship they have allowed me as the educator at Wage to develop with our student athletes. So, without further ado, I am thrilled to share virtual space tonight with Ashley Messier of Jericho, Vermont. Ashley is the Executive Director of the Women's Justice and Freedom Initiative. WJFI supports and advocates for women, girls, transgender, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people impacted by systems of oppression and is expressly committed to prison abolition. Messier's years of community organizing, advocacy, and direct experience with the criminal legal system inform her passionate and powerful approach to advocacy and abolition. She spent time previously incarcerated at the only women's facility in Vermont, the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility, CRCF. After stepping out of CRCF for the last time, Messier began working with the ACLU of Vermont, eventually becoming the lead organizer for the ACLU's Smart Justice campaign, a campaign fighting in the legislature, in the courts, in the voting booth, and in the streets to end mass incarceration by addressing sentencing, bail, and prosecutorial reform, as well as parole, release, and reentry reforms. Messier then went on to serve as the Vermont organizer for the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls. The council is a network of formerly and currently incarcerated women and girls committed to reimagining communities and creating the shift from a criminal legal system to community-led human justice. Messier also serves on the Vermont Commission on Women, alongside myself, and is a member of Vermont's Human Trafficking Task Force. I am grateful that she said yes to coming to BRCC this year, since we had hoped to host her as our keynote last year and COVID hit. So I feel honored to call her friend and colleague. Welcome, Ashley. Thank you for creating space in your busy schedule to share your thoughts and insights with us tonight. The Zoom floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. That was a wonderful introduction. I appreciate it. I am also privileged and honored to call you a friend and a colleague as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining this conversation tonight. I want to start by saying, feel free to show up however you need to show up. Snacks, drinks, your favorite t-shirt, your dog, your cat, whatever. This is a conversation. This is not a lecture. I am not the only expert in this space, as I recognize many folks on this Zoom screen. I always keep it in gallery view so I can see most folks. And I think I'm going to start the conversation backwards. I think I want to start the conversation with thinking about vision and mission and what our hopes and dreams and communities we want to live in and want to see, what we need to make that happen. A quote, we lifted up a No New Prison Re-envisioning Vermont campaign at WJFI recently, and an amazing quote from a true leader in abolition, Angela Davis, says, "I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept." And so I think in Sarah's introduction, when we're talking about our collective strength, when we think over the year, the pandemic, when we think about, mutual aid efforts springing up and checking on our neighbors and all of these very out of system, out of box responses that we had as friends and communities and neighbors, that's really the spirit to which I want to start this conversation in. I often, talk about abolition, and I think many folks who don't really understand that abolition is more a set of values and principles and goals think that I want to open the prison doors tomorrow and let murderers and rapists live next door to your loved ones. That's essentially what a lot of folks who don't understand abolition think. And so just to sort of talk about abolition is the idea that I believe that myself and all of you should live in thriving communities, that we should all be safe and all have food and all have our basic needs met and have access to all of the things that make us healthy and whole and happy. I don't use the word crime, I use the word harm. And when you think about harm, right, we have all committed harm and we have all been harmed, right? And so is it better or worse that I might have stolen a laptop for Best Buy or committed adultery against my spouse, right? When we think about harm as a spectrum, that really changes our viewpoint on harm, right? Because then we are all harming. We're all harming in some ways and we all have been harmed. And so when you simply change the words that we use, right, from crime to harm, then we get a little bit uncomfortable because we realize, oh geez, I'm on that spectrum as well, right? So, in talking with Sarah about this conversation, I really wanted to talk about the community that I want to live in, and I'm going to talk specifically about the Vermont communities I want to live in, and I want to see, and I want my friends and neighbors and loved ones to live in. And then I'm going to talk about this work in a national context because we are a part of a movement. This isn't a singular effort, but this is a movement to create a place where everyone matters, where everyone's needs are met, where we dismantle and divest from systems that profit off Black and brown bodies and oppression, systems that profit off addiction and mental health, systems that thrive off pain and suffering and white supremacy. And so in thinking about the communities we want to see, we talk a little bit about, for example, addressing harm before it occurs, implementing individualized and holistic approaches to healing. This includes, thinking about how do we divest from policing? How do we divest from prisons? How do we divest from control and supervision, caging, violence? But I want to talk about what we invest in, right? I think many of us can agree that we need to sort of divest from these systems of oppression and divest from state-sanctioned violence divest out of, violent policing and over policing and racism. Well, what do we need to invest in, right? That's the next piece of the conversation. What do we want to build? So I think that, it really starts with thinking about how do we want to respond to harm? So I always ask folks a question: if someone were to commit an egregious act of harm, very, very violent, scary act of harm, and they were going to move in next door to the person that you love most in this world. So think about that for a second. Just picture the person that you love most in this world. And then this individual who committed this very awful, violent act of harm was going to live next door to them. My question then becomes, would you be okay with that simply if they had been incarcerated for a long period of time? Or would you prefer that person to have received the love and treatment and support and, needs, having their needs met that led them to commit that act of harm? Which one would you prefer? Does simple incarceration make you feel more comfortable? Or does knowing that that person had the resources and the treatment and the support and the holistic approach to address why that act of harm happened? I'm going to just assume that most folks are like, can we go with the second one, right? Because incarceration by itself does not lead to any of that. So when we simply just say, okay, we're just going to segregate this person from community, that does not address any of the reasons, right? That act of harm may have happened. So I think we really need to think about, okay, well then how do we respond? How do we respond to harm, right? How do we then address someone being unsafe in our communities? How do we, if we step out of policing and prisons and the carceral state as a whole, what do we create to respond? So I think that's really the question I would like to explore. I'm reading the chats and I love what's being said in the chat. I think for me, when people ask me, well, what would have, so I'm just gonna be very honest with you folks. My crimes were fraud. So I was in a trafficking situation and I happened to have valid Vermont state ID. And I was informed that I would be going to the bank and cashing payroll checks that were made out in my name. And so I take full responsibility. I'm guilty for what I was charged with. And I cashed those checks, and obviously the bank found they were fraudulent. And I was charged with 2 counts of fraud, and I was incarcerated for 14 months to 4 years. That was my sentence. There was also some misdemeanors in there, right? Like I had like a retail theft. I had a trespass because I went back to the store that I had stolen clothing from. I had a theft of service because I was at well, we're going to refer to them as clients. I was at a client's house and in Barrie and was very scared and ran out of the house and had no way back to Burlington. And so I essentially stiffed a cab driver. That's what that one was for. They knew that I was struggling with addiction. The police and the state's attorney knew that I was struggling with IV heroin and cocaine addiction. They knew that I was in a trafficking situation, and their solution was to incarcerate me. I think partially their logic was for my own safety. Was that what I needed? Is that why I'm successful today? Absolutely not. But what it did do is it put me in a room with other people who were incarcerated, and we started to have conversations about how did we all end up here, right? Because I was sitting in a day room with women, and my best friend was a trans male, and I would sit with him and we would have conversations in the day room, and we would talk about how did we all end up at this table, right? Because there was different socioeconomic folks, there was different race makeup, there was different childhood backgrounds, there was different educational backgrounds. So what failed us? What failed us that this is now the common denominator, that prison is what was the solution for all of us. So again, when people ask me, well, you're successful, so prison must have worked. It wasn't prison. It wasn't prison. It was those conversations. It was the love of the people that were around me. It was when I got out of prison, I had a fantastic therapist who's actually still my therapist today. I owe him much of my success. Shout out for like real holistic treatment. I had family and friends that still were willing to see me as a person, to see me as maybe flawed, maybe I had committed harm, right? But we're still willing to see past that and restore and look forward in our relationships. I had children that for absolutely zero reason and not because I deserved it at all, showed me love and forgiveness. So when we think about the things that make us feel whole, the things that help us feel supported, the things in our lives that bring about accountability, it's not incarceration, right? It's not because the police arrested you and were incredibly violent in that altercation. It's not because, the judge was harsh on you or even maybe kind and gave you like work crew and community supervision. It's not what you find in prison settings, right? It's the people around you. It's the community that surrounds you in those moments that create accountability and healing and forward movement. And so I'd like you all to think about a time where you were harmed, because it's easy sort of to talk about this in the abstract, right? Until it was, your child that was assaulted, or your sister or best friend that was sexually assaulted, or an experience that you may have had where someone harmed you. And so I invite you to sit and think about a time that you were harmed. What did you need in that moment? What would have made you feel safe again? What helped you heal? What did you need? And if you can think of anything, I invite you to write it in the chat. The reason I always ask folks this question is because we can talk about abolition, but I always tell people it's not going to work yet. It's that, we can have the vision of thriving, holistic communities, but until we actually grapple with harm, until we actually have real conversations about our own experiences, the experiences of our loved ones, we're not going to get anywhere, because it's very different to talk about it in our own context, in our own personal experience of the world. I'm just reading some of these. Absolutely.
Just a verbal reminder to care for yourself during these emotional conversations, right? I appreciate people coming with their whole selves, their whole hearts. And also know that that can feel hard to hold and sit with. So I've got my rock. That's literally my rock. That's what helps me out. Whatever rock is for you.
I just really want to honor the things that have been written in the chat, and I just really appreciate your willingness to engage in this conversation. And if you're reading along in the chat, I want you to realize that none of this is what our system currently offers you. If you read and we're talking about validation, when we're talking about dismantling these systems, right? When we're talking about hate crimes and violence, our system does nothing to support you currently. It does nothing to give you what you really needed. It does nothing to provide you validation, right? So when someone harms us and maybe they go to court and plead guilty, most of the time, that they're just saying that, or they got a plea deal, right? And it's just like not really It's not really what you were looking for, right? Real accountability and even a real apology is about like, I'm acknowledging that I committed this act of harm. And the apology comes in the changed behavior. Our systems should be supporting changed behavior. Change behavior. That's not currently what we get. So, when I think about what Vermont currently has to offer, what the communities in Vermont look like, who lives here, how things work here, the first thing we need to acknowledge in thinking about accountability is that we've allowed these systems to operate the way they do. We've voted for the people, we've elected certain officials, we've remained silent, we've been bystanders to these systems. We have sat in our privilege and said, oh, but that doesn't affect me. I don't know anybody that's like dealing with addiction, or I don't know anybody that's going to jail. It's fine. It's not my thing. I'm going to work on something else. We don't realize that the relationship between all social justice is just that, it's a relationship. So if we want to talk about climate change and prison abolition, there's a whole conversation to be had there. If we want to talk about dismantling rape culture and we want to talk about prisons, there's a whole conversation there. When we want to talk about white privilege and racism, there's a huge conversation there. That's the foundation of the prison industrial complex. So all of social justice issues are interconnected and intertwined very, very intricately. And so thriving communities is really the question of what do we need? So one effort for that at WJFI is we're in the process of creating a people's budget, which we're hoping everyone will participate in. We're having it translated into every language. We're making it accessible. We're doing everything we can to get it to people, to get it to real people like you folks and broader. But it asks you what you need. Do you have food security? Is your housing secure? Is it actually affordable? There's a good question. Is it actually affordable? Do you struggle with houselessness? Do you face discrimination? When you fill out a form at a doctor's office, does it give you every option to express what your gender may or may not be? Or does it only say male or female? Are you consistently discriminated against in ways around poverty because you're poor? Or maybe you're really wealthy, who knows? So it starts to ask these questions. And the goal is to take the people's budget process and show our leaders, our elected officials, what the people in our communities actually need. And it's a starting point to a conversation about money, right? The divest conversation is very much about police budgets and Department of Corrections budgets and military budgets. In all of these places, we're investing millions and millions and millions of our dollars, our community dollars. And so a people's budget essentially asks all of you, what do you want? That's our money, right? That's our money. So what do we want? What do we want to prioritize? What do we need that we're not getting? What does the community in Bennington need? What does the community in Orleans need? What does the community in Burlington need? What do New American folks need? What do trans folks need? What do we need to put in place? And so we essentially collect that information and lay it on top of our state budget. And I think all of us already know that what we're going to prioritize as a Vermont community is going to look very different than what's currently prioritized. So it's a tool that allows us to start having a conversation from the community to elected officials, to our state government, that ignites a conversation around, you're not doing what we need. You're not funding what we need. And so essentially we start being able to then extract money, right, from the different things that they are funding into the things that we actually need to see in community. We have a ways to go. I want to live in a community where my neighbors have enough food. I want to live in a community where if one of my community members is struggling with violence, is struggling with intimate partner violence, if there's community struggling around sexual violence, if we're struggling with hate, gun violence, if we're struggling with poverty, I want to know that there are things in place to support those folks. If you have been harmed, I want to see things in place where you are met with love and validation, where you are met with safety and community. These are the ways we need to respond. The solution is in addressing the root causes to why these systems even operate, right? It's about community policing. It's about community responsibility, community accountability. But all of that takes community. We all have to start having an actual investment in these conversations. We all actually need to do something to push this conversation forward because we have been complicit. We have allowed these systems to operate. We have allowed this white supremacist viewpoint to infiltrate all of these systems, everything from education to the carceral state to everything in between. We need to also be responsible for changing those systems. You cannot fix something that's not broken. This is what I tell people about the criminal justice reform versus abolition conversation. And they ask me sort of, well, you used to work at the ACLU, they're very reform. You know, now you're doing this thing over here. Why the change? Because I educated myself, and because you cannot fix something that is not broken. Our system does exactly what it was designed to do. There's no arguing that. Our current policing systems, which started as slave catchers, our prison systems that profit off mostly Black and brown bodies, and then they realize, oh shit, this works so well, we're just gonna throw anybody we don't want to deal with in there. All of these systems operate perfectly. If they were effective deterrents, if they were effective rehabilitation models, if they were effective treatment, if they actually kept you safe, why would we need them in 2021? Because they would have worked already. We wouldn't have 2.5 million people in these systems and more under electronic surveillance in their own homes, which is just another form of control. They would have done their job. I think in 2021, given the pandemic, given the horrific racist police violence we've seen, it's time. We can no longer be the bystander. We can no longer be the folks who videotape on our cell phone someone else's harm. Trust and believe I will never be the person that takes out my cell phone and videotapes while any one of you are being harmed. We're both going to jail or we're both going to the hospital. Believe that, because that's what disruption is. And I've already been to prison. I'm not scared anyway. So the reality is I will never be a bystander and allow these things to happen in my community, in front of me, in front of my children, because that's not the community I want to live in. You know, I have this saying, I tend to show up as my whole self in these conversations, and people laugh when I say this, but it's very true. Don't talk about it, be about it. Abolition is just that. It's about being about it. It's about being, cliche saying, but like being the change you want to see in the world. That's actually true, because how you treat your neighbor, if you're harmed and the state's attorney calls you and says, do you want this person to go to jail or do you want them to get help? That's a choice you make. That's a choice you make. If somebody trespasses on your property or vandalizes your car, what do you say? When do you call the police? How often do you call the police? And on who? Right? These are decisions we make in our daily lives. When it's, you know, late at night and you're driving through town, do you lock your car door? Right? So there's some implicit work we have to do and very explicit work we have to do to really move as community members and as a whole community with this movement, you know, talking about moving at the speed of trust. It's about finding ways that we can engage with harm. Again, thinking about harm as a spectrum. How we can think about abolition is the investment in our communities. It's the investment in public safety. I don't know about you, but like cops with guns never made me feel safe, right? So what do we invest in? We invest in community centers. We invest in community outreach teams. We invest in real treatment. We invest in mutual aid. I don't know how many of you had any experience with mutual aid over the course of the pandemic, but I saw some really cool shit happening, right? Like I saw pop-up events and I saw, you need cash for a bill, great, here you go. And there wasn't like 850 forms and I didn't have to get permission from like 6 supervisors. It was, you need your electricity paid, great, where do I send the check? Because we do not need the level of control and system involvement and system control to be able to make this work. If anything, we saw communities respond to pandemics. We saw people, right, responding to needs because systems had no idea what to do. They had no idea what to do. And the other side of the pandemic was also that we saw half of the prison population released in Vermont. Weird, there was no giant crime wave, folks. You know, it wasn't like an episode of The Purge all of a sudden. The reality is the crime rate has stayed the same, including as like stores opened up again, you know, and like Walmart was open again. It was essentially the same crime rate, harm rate, actually. So, you know, it's one of those dichotomies that's been created, that they make you think that they sort of have to keep these people in these facilities because like they're going to get out and do all these awful things, when the reality is that's not the case. That's not the case at all. It's really about changing our perspectives, changing our behaviors. Exactly, look at that. Hotels were opened up to house the homeless. Weird, but we couldn't do that before, right? Like we could not figure out a way to respond to houselessness in the state of Vermont until they just decided that they were going to allocate funds to make sure that people had a place to sleep. That's the other thing about systems. They do what they want. They do what they want. There was no laws that changed in order for the hotels to open up. There was no laws that changed to decarcerate our facilities. It was literally because somebody's like, oh, okay, cool, send the check, open the door. So that makes you question, why can't we do more? Why aren't we doing something very different? I think as we approach 7:15, I really like to open up for conversation. I do invite hard questions. I always tell Sarah those are the questions I learn the most from, whether it's about my own personal story and experience or the work I do or my viewpoints. I think we learn the most when we can meet each other with some real honesty. And I'd like to have a conversation with you all about any of this or more or questions. And Sarah, of course, is putting back the lead with love, low ego, high impact, and move at the speed of trust. I'm very trusting, so I'm good. We're good.
We encourage folks to raise a hand or raise I don't know, clapping hands. They're hard to, I can never find the right thing. Or if you want to, you know, put your camera on just for a moment to let us know you'd like to ask a question or share a response, that is welcome. Or you can type into the chat if that is more comfortable for you. Hannah and I will keep track and call out folks to share their ideas and hopes, dreams, and aspirations, as I say, as folks line up. Linnea is in fact raising their hand. Excellent. I thought so, but I was like, I don't know. Linnea, feel free to unmute and join in.
I can never find the raise hand thing. Every time somebody points me directly to where it is, I swear it's just not with my account. So I'm gonna try to step back from my ego a little bit because I'm nervous about phrasing this question in the right way, but I'm going to do my best. So I work at a DVSV program. I work at Women's Safe in Addison County, and something that comes up a lot in our conversations around advocacy for survivors and education has to do with reducing options for survivors. So when we talk about abolition, and whether survivors want to report or call the police or have folks be incarcerated, whatever it is, something that I find myself getting pushed up against a lot. We tend to kind of have this conversation around, if we try to move away from the prison industrial complex, then we're taking options away from survivors, which I struggle with, because in my head I'm like, but does that only feel like an option because that's really one of the only options that we show as being legitimate or as quote unquote useful? There aren't as many other options out there. So I don't know. I guess my question is, how do you navigate that conversation around abolition and supporting survivors when somebody might say that trying to move away from the prison industrial complex takes options away from survivors? I hope that was clear. I'm sorry.
Yes, nope, very clear. Had that conversation myself. So I am a survivor of pretty violent domestic violence and sexual assault. And so I always tell people, what options do we currently give survivors? It's either the legal system or nothing. Abolition would give survivors of that type of harm all of the options. Do you want to do a restorative process? Do you want to have a dialogue? Do you want to have that person seek treatment? Do you want that person to simply be separated from your community, but does that necessarily mean in a prison? There are a myriad of options that we could be giving survivors of intimate partner violence that we currently don't give them. And when only essentially 9% of DV and SV survivors even utilize the criminal legal system, how effective is it anyway? 9%. And if you ever talk to a survivor about the effects that utilizing the legal system has had on them, the way they were interrogated, the way they were treated during trial, the way they had to testify, the things they were asked to recount and tell in front of strangers, and then what do they get? That person gets incarcerated for a period of time. The average is 3 to 5 years for domestic violence in the state of Vermont. But that person doesn't have to do treatment during those 3 to 5 years. They don't have to get help. They don't have to get counseling. They don't have. So again, in 3 to 5 years, how is that survivor going to feel? So what we talk about in abolition is, how do we look at other options? How do we look at places that they are doing things very differently? I think the DVSV groups have started to move away from their relationship with law enforcement, have started to move into spaces of really honoring survivors' voices and experiences. We are the experts by the things we are directly impacted by. We should be centering those voices in any movement, right? And so if you talk to survivors, it's not the incarceration they need. It's the feeling safe, feeling validated. Many folks want to maintain those relationships with the person that was committing the harm. There's a lot of folks that want to stay with that partner, but they want the harm to stop. Do we have an option for that currently? Of course not. No, because we have no contact orders. So how do we address that? How do we address the kids who are involved in some of these situations? Because again, you get a probation officer, there's a no contact order. Now you can't see your kids because your PO says, no, you didn't get a job. So now we use incarceration to further harm, right? This family and these children who are already in this situation of harm. and in desperate need of repair. So the reality is that we have conversations with survivors that break down, what do they need? What do they really need? What does incarceration serve, right, for a survivor? And how do we give them something better? How do we give them something more supportive? How do we give them something more meaningful? How do we provide services to the survivor and the person that committed the harm to really figure out the underlying pieces of that issue and create real safety? Prison isn't going to do that. Many folks have gotten out of prison and then murdered the person they harmed. That's the reality. I really appreciate that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your response.
Yeah, thank you for pointing out to us, I think, Ashley, that when we talk about abolition, we're talking about imagination, folks. Like, right? Like, well, I don't know. We're probably not going to get it right every time. There is, again, it's not about getting it right, right? There are so many other opportunities for us to explore that might meet the needs of the person who experienced harm. And if we're thinking about who experienced harm, when I think about incarceration in what is now the United States, how much of the time the people experiencing harm are like properties. We really protect properties well in what is now the United States, right? Better than we protect humans many times. I think about the ways that last summer's rallies for Black Lives and for abolition and accountability for police violence. So many folks were like, well, I was behind it until they broke a window. Comparing somehow the notion that a property, like a damage to someone's property, was equivalent to the loss of life experienced at the hands of police. Like, I was like, no, those are different. But we do a really good job protecting property here in the US. Other folks have thoughts. I see some great comments in the chat as well.
We do have a question from Libby.
Excellent.
Hi. So my question is actually going to be sort of similar to Linnea's. So I work in a prevention education agency that's targeting specifically relationship violence and dating violence. One thing that I really struggle with my students is while simultaneously a lot of my students definitely do not feel safe contacting police and very much feel threatened and feel that they really have been harmed by police. At the same time, I think that the way that we have taught children consistently up until this point is that police is sort of the one and only button that you press when you are in an emergency and when you are in a violent situation. And one thing that I struggle with as we're on this journey to abolition and as that's a continued process is providing them with instantly accessible resources and providing them with that same sense of even though violence resists simplicity and resists simple solutions, providing them with some type of consistent place or resource that I can refer them to when they're worried about immediate physical safety. And I was wondering for anybody who does work with students or children, like how we deal with that and what people's recommendations are for being able to provide easy to understand solutions that are easy to remember in times of crisis when you need immediate physical safety for kids.
I appreciate that question. Libby, I would invite you to share your contact information because I think there are a couple folks on here that could probably give you some really great thoughts and options. So I have teenagers in my home. I'm a single parent to 4 kiddos, 3 of which are all in high school. A mix of kiddos that I identify as male and female right now. We talk about this a lot. We talk about how do they respond to harm if they don't call the police? Like, what are their other options, right? What do, my daughter who's about to go off to college in a year, we talk a lot about violence on campus, about sexual assault. We talk about police, but then we talk about community resources. We talk about identifying safe people who are willing to show up in a crisis. We talk about advocates who work 24/7 and how do we access them. We talk about, okay, if you do have to call the police, because you're right, we're on a journey to abolition. We're not there yet. So in the meantime, like, our society is just built in a way where we still have to, in certain situations, utilize these systems, unfortunately. But how can you utilize them with the least amount of harm to yourself or others? So the mix of police and advocates, the mix of police and folks that work in, for example, DV and SV, if it's a situation of either of those. There's community outreach teams. You know, Vermont has street teams, right, that can be part of that conversation, part of that response. And we need to create a lot more, right? That's part of that divest and invest, because what do kiddos need? We know, you know, especially with adolescents, rarely are they heard. Rarely are they heard anyway. Even when they do reach out to police, we know, especially for kiddos ages, you know, 13 to 18, police respond in very negative ways, even if there is just like egregious evidence that they have been harmed. They do not respond to our youth in supportive or safe ways. So it doesn't even feel like, it most of the time doesn't even feel like an appropriate option because of how harmful, even when you're asking for help, it is for our youth to interact with police. And then layer on top of that, if you're a youth that is not white or is not privileged or is not wealthy, then you're really screwed. So, I mean, we have to find other resources. We have to find other responses.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
It looks like Danielle's hand went up. Hannah, do you have anybody else? Just checking in.
Nope, just Daniel.
Daniel.
Thanks so much for speaking today. I was wondering, when I first stumbled across Women's Justice and Freedom Initiative, I was really surprised that Vermont would have an explicitly like abolitionist organization that was like actually funded and had staff members. And so kind of in that vein, like, I think ultimately abolition pursues a future without borders, right? But like in the meantime, while Vermont still exists, what unique opportunities or like characteristics about Vermont do you think will facilitate kind of abolitionist goals?
I love that question. First of all, just from a statistical point, we have the population to realize some of this. We have a small statewide population. We have a small population of incarcerated folks and folks under community supervision. We have a citizen legislature, right? So you shop in the same grocery store as your senator, you know, your little brother or your child is on the soccer team, right, with House Representative so-and-so's kid. In normal, I'm going to call them normal-ish times. Nothing was ever normal, but prior to the pandemic times, you could like walk into our state house, you could walk into any committee room, right? So our relationship and our access to our elected officials is very different here. I think that we, you know, Vermont, I like to think, has some values. You know, we're small towns, we're rural farming communities. Some of the values and morals that are lifted up in abolition are the same. You know, when you hear about Vermont, right, you hear like, we got cows and mountains, Ben and Jerry's, and we make maple syrup, and we got some pretty leaves for a few months in the fall. Oh, and we have some skiing. That's like, okay, if we get enough snow and haven't ruined the climate completely. So that's essentially like the conversation about Vermont. There's like this very bucolic picture that gets painted, but the reality is we have an underbelly, right? We're also like the heroin capital of the world. Like almost half of our population is at or under the poverty line. You know, we're an incredibly, we're the second whitest state in the nation. Oh, but we don't have racism here. Some of our elected officials might tell you they're dead wrong. So Vermont is sort of a prime place to have these conversations because it is so small. Our entire state population is like at or around 600,000 people. That's like a city in most states. You cannot talk to me, 5 people. It takes 5 people for me and you to realize we're like cousins somehow, right? Like your sister's mom's boyfriend's hairdresser's daughter, like me and them went to school together. So, you know, it's a very small place. It's very interconnected. Despite the fact that our systems seem massive here, they're not. We can talk to those people. We can go to those offices. It's accessible. And you know, we're small towns, right? So we know our neighbors. We know our neighbors. Whether we want to get involved in Tom and Sue's fight when, you know there's something going on there is a different question, but like we know each other. You know, we believe in showing up for each other. I think Vermonters, you know, are really prideful around sort of what makes, you know, this Vermont exceptionalism, that we're kind and we believe in community and small town values and, you know, flea markets and bake sales and all of those pieces. So I think that there's an opportunity just in this, in the sheer sort of moral makeup of Vermont. Well, at least what we like to think is the moral makeup of Vermont. And the statistical numbers, just looking at the population sizes. I like that. We need to move away from the it's none of my business. It's always your business. It is always your business. I don't care if you're at the laundromat, grocery store, getting gas at the mobile, walking down Church Street. It is always your business because you live here. Thank you, Sarah, for adding that. So, you know, I think that's what makes Vermont unique. You know, we're in a national movement, so there's a national campaign to end the incarceration of women and girls as we know it. They're starting with lifting up a clemency ask of President Biden to give clemency to 100 women in his first 100 days. This is work happening in Southern Florida and in Connecticut and in Massachusetts and all over the California, Texas, Arizona, everywhere in between. This is a movement on all sides of this country to realize the journey of abolition, but it's just that it's a journey. It's a journey and it's a vision. And so Vermont is uniquely situated for certain reasons. And then we're, you know, Vermont causes us to be 25 years behind other states in other ways. So the hope though is that we have the right, we'll call it a cocktail for lack of better terminology, of pieces that make this prime time and prime conversation. And our organization was very successful. In year one, we were funded because people believe in the work we do and in centering directly impacted voices. That's something that's very important too. So appreciate that question.
May, I see your hand, your physical hand go up. Would you like to unmute and join us?
Yes. So I thought I had a comment or a question, and then I got so distracted by all of the other wonderful comments and questions that now I have 1,000. So I'm going to try to kind of refocus a little bit. And I guess I'll say this, Ashley, I'm on this call because I endorse where you're at on this issue. And yet I am filled with resistance to it. And so I really want to be in situations where I can drag myself along or be dragged along because I do endorse it. I think that's where it's at. And I love, Sarah, when you use the word imagination, because I think part of the problem I'm having right now is a failure of imagination and not being able to step out of the paradigm that I've lived in for over 70 years and imagine a different paradigm. And all of that is by way of saying, so I work with women who are transitioning out of the facility into the community. It's a residential facility. And one of the issues that we have again and again and again is that there is no place for folks who are having a hard time making that transition. And so we will sometimes feel that the safest place is if they're back in the facility. And I can tell you that sometimes the folks living in the house will even say, I'm not safe out here, I got to go back. And so I don't know how I expect you to respond to that, but this is such a complicated situation. Of course, the facility is not the right place, and healing is not happening there. But there ain't no place. And that's what we have to create. I guess I'll leave it at that.
I appreciate that, May, and I appreciate your honesty around the resistance. I think you and I had that conversation on the phone. I'm still resistant to some of the pieces, right? It's like, even for me sometimes, who is incredibly invested in this work, and this work is a continual learning thing. I never know enough. I've never learned enough. I've never studied enough. I've never talked to enough people. There's no like, okay, now I know all the things about this work or all the things about abolition. That's never going to happen. But, you know, I find myself resistant every once in a while too, because it is so ingrained in all of us, right? We're so used to sort of operating in this way that we don't even think about. It's not even intentional. And we have to make it intentional, right? We have to make these thoughts and these decisions and these actions, we have to make them intentional. And how absolutely devastating that someone feels like they need to go to prison to be safe. I mean, can we just think of the magnitude of that for a second? That anyone in our community would be so harmed and so broken that they felt like a cage was the safest option for them. That's heartbreaking. And it like causes me to feel some shame and some guilt. That's the options that I've allowed to be in my community. You know, May, I know women who have been in your program. I also know women who have lost their lives recently because we currently do not have things in place to meet people's needs, to address the harm they've experienced, the trauma. And we're losing a significant amount of people who are my friends, who are people that I loved and cared about, which just makes this conversation so much more necessary. Because this isn't an abstract conversation for me. This is, I don't know how many funerals I've been to lately because it's been so many. This is what my weekends have been consumed by since Christmas. Obituaries and funerals and kids whose moms have died and sisters who had to put their sister in a casket last Saturday and watch the hearse drive away. Like, this is the reality of our community. And by not having an imagination, by not being willing to step out of our comfort zone, people are dying. People are dying. People are being harmed in unspeakable ways. And so, May, what I would say is it's a journey, but I think there's some sitting with our uncomfortability that we have to do. I think there's some looking at, why are we so comfortable, even if it's been 30 years or 18 years or 70 years or anything in between? Why are we so comfortable with the status quo? I think you have to ask yourself that question. Why are you okay with shit going this way? That's, you know, that's only a question between you and yourself. Not you specifically, May. I'm speaking to everybody. If you're not doing anything about it, then clearly you're okay with it. That's really the reality. This is a movement, which takes just that, movement, action. It can be small. You might be really busy, but small actions add up, large actions add up, but it has to be forward movement. It has to be motion.
I want to jump in quickly here to name that some of the comments in the chat are very powerful, and in particular want to highlight that beyond imagination, as Ava from Out in the Open says, it's not just imagination, it's shifting funding. So again, we go back to the people's budget. I don't know, Ashley, I know that you knew this in a Vermont Commission on Women meeting just off the top of your head once, but do you recall how much money is currently allocated for a new prison in the state of Vermont?
Oh, I'm so happy you asked me that. Well, so right now they have $1.5 million in the capital budget for this year just to talk about it. Just to talk about it, folks. Not actually build anything, not put a shovel in the ground, but like literally just to continue the studying of the various options of just one prison. Maybe it's two prisons. Maybe we build a giant prison campus in the middle of the state and call it good. $1.5 million just to continue the conversation this year. It's $50 to $60 million to build one facility. And that's just the starting cost. That doesn't include sort of the sustaining costs after the build.
Yeah.
We're talking an egregious amount of money, and they're really pushing to build this sort of campus style prison complex in Vermont. And the cost of that would be, I mean, it would take us 30 years to pay for it. It's just such a substantial cost. But the interesting thing is, folks, do you know that they have not asked for not one study or conversation about what else is possible? So our fight in the legislature has been, if you can afford $1.5 million to talk about building a new prison, maybe you could have one study group on what else is possible. Can I have just one? I don't think that's too much to ask. Why are we not having any conversations about what else is possible when you are going to spend $60 million of taxpayers' money while you're currently defunding our schools, while you're currently pulling money away from teachers, while you're currently trying to figure out how to have affordable housing and childcare, and dismantling our medical health insurance systems, and folks can't afford to go see the doctor. Folks can't afford treatment. How about some transportation? This is Vermont. The only place that has buses essentially is like Burlington, and maybe you find a couple somewhere else. But how about we invest in some of that? No, let's build a new prison, and we want to build it bigger than we even need, because we think after the pandemic, folks, everybody's going to commit crime again, and we're going to need not only the prison the size we have it, but we actually need a bigger one. We actually need a bigger one, folks. So, you know, that's the layman's version of explaining to you what's happening in our legislature right now. But the ask is essentially 1.5 million this fiscal year to continue talking about a feasibility study and planning for new prison construction in the state of Vermont.
We do have a question from Katerina. Sorry if I said that wrong.
Thank you so much. Ashley, I want to thank you for participating in and responding to life in a way that has made you who you are. I'm very grateful, and I know that I'm not alone. My question is, I'd love to listen to any reflections that you have about safety, like what safety means, and particularly reestablishing safety after trauma or being harmed. Because I experience that as really being at the core of what we are collectively doing here.
Absolutely. It's a great question. Thank you. And I really appreciate what you said to start. I have struggled sometimes showing up as my whole self through all my experiences and participating in life fully, trying to harness that as I get older. That's a good question. You know, I think that everyone on this on my little Zoom screen here would have a different answer to what safety is. For me, and I think back to I've been through a lot of trauma, a lot of violence, and I think safety for me really looked like being able to speak my truth, being able to speak my experience and my truth. And it's not even so much like the fact that people will always discount it or try to discredit it, but having people that did validate my experience, having people that I could have honest conversations with, right? I mean, safety, you're never gonna, like, I will never say that, oh, I felt safe because like the police showed up. That never happened. Usually when they showed up, it was very worse for me after they left, right? So safety for me is really an internal conversation. And then that internal dialogue manifests what I need sort of in the outward world. I need my home to be a safe place. I've created a home for myself and my children where we have some collective agreements. We don't take each other's belongings without asking. This might sound very cliche, but it means a lot to kids who lived in a home where like they were stolen from and their things were destroyed. So we have some agreements. We don't touch each other's belongings. We just don't unless we ask. We don't yell. I yell sometimes at them. I'm going to own that. And then their reflection back to me is like, but I thought we don't yell. Nobody puts their hands on anybody in our house. We had enough of that at one point, right? So I think that safety is more of an internal conversation. And then it's about what you need on the outside. I mean, I could say that, well, I want to feel physically safe in my community, right? And so how do I make that happen? Is it that I need to change my behavior, or that my community needs to change how it shows up so that I feel safe, right? Sort of that conversation about, do we tell girls to not wear the short skirt to the bar, don't drink too much, you know, because you're going to don't walk home at night alone, that conversation? Or do we say like, no, we need to address why like sexual assault happens, right? Because it's rarely about sex and it's about power and control. So, you know, I think having the safety conversation is very individualized, but I don't think it's ever like, it never, at least in my experience, has been police and prisons. It's never been part of a safety conversation I've had with anyone.
Speaking of safety, I don't know if you can hear me over all the safety that's flying over my home right now in the form of an F-35 fighter jet. I don't like them. Thank you for all of that reflection. I also want to shout out that folks in the chat are expressing deep gratitude to you, Ashley, for sharing both vulnerability and realness and examples from your real life that they're resonating with deeply. We have time for just like one or two more questions. If folks want to jump in, feel free to type something in the chat, raise a physical hand, raise a reaction of some sort that you can find. I got a wave from Melissa. Hello. Go for it, Melissa.
Thank you. Thanks, Sarah. And thank you, Ashley, for being here and so graciously answering all of our questions. One of the things I was really excited about for the Dismantling Rape Culture Conference this year is that it's Building Radical Communities Conference. So I feel like in the pandemic, so many things have become possible in terms of mutual aid and the importance of caring for each other and community building. And so Ashley, I'm wondering if you could just sort of, as we get ready to close out, talk about what you are excited to build.
That's a great question. What am I excited to build? WJFI from day one pretty much has done mutual aid. We started off with, I see a mutual aid friend on my screen right now. So, you know, mutual aid started to pop up everywhere, and a dear, wonderful friend of mine who's on my screen, I might call her out, Kim Jordan, came to me and said, Ashley, what about a mutual aid and like restorative justice lens project? Like, what if we, like, nobody's really thinking about like people coming out of prison or like those people in community that, you know, are under community supervision. Like there's like this group that's like kind of like not necessarily in the mainstream mutual aid stuff. There's this great project out west that's doing it. We could talk to them. They said they'd have a conversation with us. And I was like, oh yes, let's do that. Let's do that. And then as that project sort of got lifted up and I had a lot of conversations with Kim, and WJFI got accepted through its IRS process and all that wonderful jazz. I said, let's have mutual aid money at WJFI for We sent money into the prisons, into the facilities, unapologetically. For commissary folks, I used organizational money and I sent people food in prison. That's what I did. I sent people money so they could call their loved ones because there was no visits. I used that money to help folks in the community get tires on their cars so they could get to work. I used that money to help a family who had a brand new baby who was living in a hotel in the COVID response housing get clothes for that baby because nobody else could or would. We bought people cell phones, and not just cheap cell phones, folks. We bought them cell phones that had data, that are smartphones, that had like all the things. Because who the hell can meet with anybody without Zoom? Anybody? No. Your doctor's on Zoom, your therapist's on Zoom, your PO's on Zoom. All the things are on Zoom or Google Meets, or I can't even name all the platforms. So Microsoft Teams, all the freaking platforms. People need to be able to do that to survive. Can't survive right now without internet. And this is Vermont. So, you know, I'm excited to think about how do we do mutual aid as a thing? Like, not just because there's COVID. How do we do mutual aid just freaking because? Just because people have needs. Just because we all aren't millionaires and, you know, have all kinds of access wealth. So how can we start showing up in communities and meeting people's needs without the 65 pieces of paperwork, without the red tape, without the bureaucracy, but like, just because we're people and there's a need and I have the thing, so here you go. No judgments, no, you have to justify to me why I should give you the thing. Oh, but you might go use it for drugs, so I'm not going to give you the thing. Who the hell am I to make that decision? I'm not. I'm just a person. You have a need, here you go. So that's one thing I'm excited to see. You know, in our new campaign, I'm really excited to have the conversations about how we redefine harm in rehabilitation, how we stop using scary words like crime, and how we start talking about harm, because everybody gets real uncomfortable in their seats when we say, oh, but crime is actually harm and we've all harmed. People have like a moral panic that happens all of a sudden for them because they're like, oh shit, I've harmed too. Right, because we're all people, because we all do things. We all have things done to us. We all do things. That's the relationship of humanity. I'm excited to think about how we use the people's budget as a tool, as a sword, as a resource. I'm excited to have these conversations because stop number one, folks, is like these conversations at the dinner table, at the party, you know, when you're on the walk by the lake, in your classroom, in your workplace, is starting to have these conversations about how we shift from what we're used to, from that status quo, and how we sit in the uncomfortability of doing something very new and very different. We all know we need it. If this year has proven nothing else, we are in desperate need of change. So I think those are the top things I'm excited about. I'm excited about nicer weather. This is Vermont. I need some vitamin D in my life and some sunshine. So can I just throw that in there too for just cause?
Oh, here they come again. Really? Yes. Thank you for sharing those excitements. There are also things happening over in the chat. What you will see there is that I'm going to shout at you, but WJFI's contact information, all of the ways to stay connected to them is available. You will also be getting a follow-up email from the UVM Wage Center with an evaluation and with ways to stay connected to us. Can someone give me a thumbs up if you actually can hear me? Okay, cool. It's really funny. This is amazing. $36,000 for 1 hour. Just flew over my home. How many, that's a full year's salary for, that's higher than a full year's salary for many Vermonters, is what I'll say. So, I want to encourage folks to stay connected. Also, Ashley named that, you know, this is happening in all sorts of spaces in Vermont, and not the least of which is our legislature. And we are small, but we are mighty, and we have connections that we can access. I encourage folks to get hyper local. Learn who, like, get to know your elected officials in your town. Not just the national elections, right? But like, let's start talking to the folks who live in our town, and that we are electing to do things for our school boards, for example. I know in the state of Vermont, lots of conversations about school resource officers and whether or not police should be in schools. That's happening in a lot of spaces right now in school boards, and they have a lot of control. School boards also have a lot of curricular control. So get involved in that hyper local space as well. Is one of the things that I know I'm excited about and try to do despite my deeply introverted tendencies. Ashley, come back.
Can we add, who are your neighbors? Take a walk. Take a walk. Get to know your neighbors, whether you really want to or not, right? Like, you want to talk hyper local. I was having a conversation with a friend about, but I don't know, like, I'm not really, like, I'm kind of shy. Like, I don't know if I can like go knock on everybody's door. Go knock on everybody's door, or wait till they come out. Like, it's nice weather soon. But like, honestly, do you know your neighbors? Because how can you respond, or how can they respond to you if there's no relationship, right? So at least at the very least, on your street, in your neighborhood, you know, if you're in a small town, do you know the farm down the street? Like, do you at least know the kids' names? You know, things like that. Hyper local means just that. Looks very different depending on where you are. But get to know your neighbors. Get to know the people on your street, in your small town. Have conversations with them, because that's what this work looks like. When we talk about grassroots organizing, it literally means grassroots, at the root of the grass. That means your yard, your street, your town, etc.
Thank you for that reminder, Ashley. It goes against every fiber of my being that I was raised with. My mom is on this call. Thanks, Mom. Real struggle to get to know my neighbors, but I'm working on it. I actually am having hot flashes thinking about it, and I do know I can name most of the neighbors on the street. I'm getting there. Hot flashes. I want to thank everyone for coming into this space with us tonight and sharing this space and being so thoughtfully engaged with your curiosity and your care and bringing your questions, but also your answers. I learned so much from all of you tonight. Ashley, I always learn from you when I'm in spaces with you, and I'm grateful for it. We appreciate the energy of the space and want to give a shout out to Hannah for helping facilitate the back and forth and the chat, and all of you coming in and out of the space and all of the tech things that need to happen so that it felt like we were in community together. As I mentioned, you will receive an evaluation via email. We hope you'll take a few minutes to share your feedback with us. In the meantime, you can keep next week's Building Radically Connected Community Conference offering on your radar, and I will be putting this into the chat in a moment, which is about what do we want to build outside of spaces of violence and harm in terms of sex and relationships. We want to build a sex positive, joyfully centered universe. So we'll be hosting Come One, Come All, an edutaining pleasure panel with local sexuality educators and fabulous folks, Kel Arbor, Reggie Condra, and Jenna Emerson. You might be introduced to them by different names at the show, so to speak. So that's happening next Tuesday. And again, I'll put that in the chat in a moment. But that's really all about sex positive, joyful sexuality education as a means of creating that which exists in the absence of violence, which is joy and connection and community, which is what you all brought here tonight. Thank you so much. Ashley, any final words of wisdom that you would like to impart upon us?
Oh wow, no pressure. I would say, I'm going to repeat the quote I said at the beginning. Amazing Angela Davis. I am no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. So figure out what you can no longer accept in your community and go do something about it. Don't talk about it, be about it.
Gonna make a t-shirt. Thank you so much, everyone. We hope that you have a restful evening. Do something that brings you pleasure and joy and comfort. And we'll see you next week for Come One, Come All. And if not next week, hopefully sometime soon, maybe even in person.